site selection. This is worth a point. Our intent is to avoid the development of inappropriate sites and reduce environmental impact from the location of a building on a site. All right, that's our overarching goal. Avoid development of inappropriate. Well, what is inappropriate? Okay, now let's get to the requirements. Do not develop buildings, roads, or parking areas on the following. Prime farmland. What's prime farmland? Everyone here is now living in Iowa. You should all be well versed in what prime farmland is. Prime farmland is? How do you know prime farmland from not prime farmland? What do you think? Aaron, come on. Prime farmland.
It's being cultivated right now?
That's not good enough. It's a lot more complicated definition than that. You don't have to know. That's what this reference is for. U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. CFR, U.S. Code of Federal Regulations gives you a definition as far as what prime farmland is. And there's a whole host of stuff that goes into that. It has to be, about moisture content and the level of slope and erosion and, tillable, arable soil. And okay, those aren't things that you have to memorize. What you have to remember is U.S. Department of Agriculture, U.S. CFR, Title VII. All right? That's your reference. LEED is not going to define this. It's going to reference you into some other place where you can look up what the definition of prime farmland is. Does everyone understand how this works? That would be a testable reference that they might ask you about on the exam. They're not going to ask you about what's in U.S. CFR Title VII. They're going to ask you for that reference. Okay? All right. Previously undeveloped land lower than 5 feet above the FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, 100-year floodplain. What is this 100-year floodplain business? Maybe some of you have seen it on a civil drawing. Yes?
Well, it's just an area, I forget what agency determines it, but it's
okay.
An area based on statistical
FEMA.
Data. FEMA. It
okay.
Is FEMA, okay. But yeah, based on statistical data of floods in the past. And
you might see it marked on a civil drawing as the 1% line. 1 year out of every 100, it will reach this level. Or here in Ames, we call this the 5-year storm. Seems like we have the 100-year flood about every 3 or 4 years here in Ames. Okay. For those of you who aren't from Ames, you have to understand we get a lot of floods here for some reason. All right. So what this is saying is that you can't build on any land that's lower than 5 feet above that 1% line. How does this change our sites? Does it change our sites? In other words, the amount of area on any given plot of land that you're going to buy that you can actually build on. Anyone? Come on now.
if you're building next to, an embankment or a river or something, it's going to keep you a lot further away from the edge of the bank or the river than what you planned on.
Exactly. Well, it's even worse than that, even, to be honest, because most building codes just want you to be above the 1% line. This says you got to be 5 feet above that. Well, what's that do to our site? It might take a bunch of your site that you're going to build a building on and put even more of it off limits. Right? Or what else would you have to do to the site then? Yes, Marco? Use your button. Oh, you don't know? Okay. Well, come on. What else?
You could develop the land and build it up.
There we go. We could bring in a bunch of fill to raise that. But if we're going to raise a certain section of it in a flood, higher, we've got to cut somewhere else on the job site. This becomes especially important as we get into some of these later credits on stormwater management. So remember this one as we get into stormwater management. This could cause us either to have a smaller developable footprint on a given site, or we could spend quite a bit of money bringing in enough dirt to raise the elevation high enough to get us above that 5 foot above the 1% line. Okay, could drastically affect the way an owner builds on a site. Yes.
Like if we have a building with the ground floor completely as parking, then will this cover the thing?
The ground floor is completely parking. Yes. Here, notice it says, do not develop buildings, roads, or parking areas. Okay. Buildings, roads, or parking areas. So yes, it drastically affect. Okay? And yes, it is applicable. All right? Okay, so build above the 100-year floodplain. Why is this in here? The stormwater management business? Any guesses? Especially those of you who might be familiar with the South Duff area here in Ames? Yes.
It leads to bad development that costs a lot of money down the road.
Yeah, there we go. Right. This is opinion. I don't know this for certain. But the South Duff area used to be much worse than it is now. There used to be a grocery store down to where right about where Best Buy is today. And we used to call it the Unsinkable Save You More food store. Because during 1993, when I was a student here, it flooded so bad and so frequently that it wasn't uncommon for you to find bags of Doritos floating down the street. Don't ask me how I know this. All right? But, in theory, it's if we develop too quickly without good planning, if we're not developing high enough, as we put in hardscapes, not just buildings but also parking lots and roads, that water's got to go somewhere. And if it's not absorbing into the ground, it's going to flood something. And I think some of that might be what happened in the South Duff area here in Ames. Now, granted, 1993 was an exceptional year. At least we thought it was the 500-year storm until last year. But there you are. Okay. Other requirements for site selection. You can't build on land that is habitat for any species on state or federal threatened or endangered lists. U.S. Fish and Wildlife. If you look in the Green Book, right, there's a reference in here that takes you to a website for the national list for threatened and endangered species. Okay? You can't develop within 100 feet of any wetland defined by the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 40. All right, that's going to give you, let's see here. What is a wetland? All right, you look up the regulations of 40 CFR, and it'll tell you. You don't have to memorize that stuff. All right, what you would have to memorize is the 100 feet of a wetland, and you'd have to memorize what standard that would tell you, give you a definition of what a wetland is. Where else can't you develop? Previously undeveloped land that is within 50 feet of any water body. Well, what's a water body? Water body would be a sea, a lake, a river, a stream, or tributary that supports or could support fish, recreation, or industrial use consistent with the terminology of the Clean Water Act. Another reference. 50 feet of pretty much anything that's water, water-wise. Or you can't develop on a public parkland. However, there is an exemption here. If the owner trades an equal parcel of land, equal or greater value, that they can turn into a park, that is deemed appropriate. And where this might happen, I want to say this happened in Iowa City, where the hospital wanted to expand or build another addition onto their facility, and that happened to be a public park. What they did was, well, they didn't want to, even though there was a park there, it made sense to put the hospital there. I mean, in addition onto, there's no point in stretching that facility out into a different area. So the university just traded some open land that it had in another part of the city. Right? You got to trade it for equal or greater value. All right, now what's this mean? You can't build in any of these areas and still have a LEED building? Anyone? No? Yes?
You just lose the point.
You just lose the point, exactly. It's not saying that you can't build on prime farmland and still have a LEED building. It's just saying you're not going to get this particular point. It doesn't say that you can't build within a water body or within 50 feet of a water body. It just says that you're going to lose this point. Points are voluntary, remember. You do not have to achieve them. You have to achieve enough to build up your point total towards a certain level of certification. Right? So, prerequisites are mandatory, credits are voluntary. You just have to have enough.